is Cruz's final homework assignment by me, Johan Romero. So we're first going to start off with cross-cultural exchange, and cross-cultural exchange is simply defined as a person, place, or place that relates to different cultures or nations that is mostly kind of shared between one, two, or multiple nations. So a couple examples of this would be the slave trade, because the slave trade obviously introduced lots of cultures to each other because, many European countries such as the Spanish, Portuguese, and English were all, kind of in the slave trade, and they all kind of, because of their relationship with each other through the slave trade of African slaves, they intermingled a lot and ended up, sharing a lot of their cultures as well as, well, stealing from African cultures such as, food and, some clothing elements as well. But it was mainly how the Africans kind of, I guess, adopted Christianity through Europeans, although, it might have been through force. They still, kind of took it. Then another one, which in my opinion would be one of the most important ones, would be the Silk Road. The Silk Road was very, very heavy in the spread of culture, food, ideas, all sorts of things. And it's a huge route that just allowed many different cultures to share things in between themselves, and a very important one would be the Chinese selling and trading tea and silk, and the British kind of spreading their influence of clothing and Christianity throughout the whole of Eurasia and some parts of northern Africa, such as Egypt. Colonialism is also another important one. It was mainly when Europeans colonized nations such as India, and they would quote unquote exchange or forcibly change culture with the natives, mainly through clothing, food, and again, Christianity being spread. Another one would be Columbus discovering America, although discovering is a little iffy, but that's a topic for another day. Um, it led to many types of cultural exchange from, making the Native Americans kind of share their culture with Columbus himself, and then him bringing that back to Europe, being able to change that throughout, Britain, Spain, Portuguese, and all, or Portugal, and other European countries, which kind of led them to intermingling a little bit more, which then in turn led to our first one, the slave trade. And then another one, which was fairly, or not fairly recent, but much more recent than the others, would be alliances during wars, mainly World War One, World War Two. During wars, nations would become allies and eventually intermingle cultures because, out of more fear than anything, they didn't want these other countries to become enemies and then, them have to forcibly fight against each other, which would just, breed more hate and more violence in the end. So they would kind of intermingle their cultures subtly but effectively, to the point where some cultures became almost indistinguishable from each other, which helped, kind of keep the peace. And then next we go to cross-regional exchange. Cross-regional exchange is basically the exchange of any type of goods specific to one region. Tobacco, horses, and paper were all types of cross-regional exchange due to the fact that they were specific to one region and they traded out to others. Now, obviously, those are a little bit more spread out, but according to the time in which they were first, traded, and for a long time after they were traded, they were, very specific to one nation. Examples of this kind of go back again the slave trade, because slaves technically were considered cross-regional exchange because they mainly came from Africa, and they were forced to dig minerals and find jewels that were at one point only found in Africa. And then the monsoon marketplace, or the Indian Ocean trade route, in which many Indian cultures, mainly along the coast of India, would interact with other cultures, people, and civilizations, since at that time boat traveling or travel and commerce through boat was the kind of the fastest and most efficient way to get things across the planet. Then we have the Library of Alexandria, which is an enormous library full of cultural references, recipes, farming techniques, and much, much more that kind of played a very central role in exchanging culture throughout Europe, since it was in such a kind of central location and had just so much in it. Then we have the European expansion, which in the 15th century, Europe sought to expand trade routes. That way they could kind of, make themselves a much more prominent country and, kind of spread Christianity for the most part and kind of take over as well. And then finally, we have the Silk Road, which again, the Silk Road is a prime route for trade and all sorts of commerce and ideas from nation to nation or simply city to city, because it spread from all the way from China to into Europe, which is an insanely long distance, but was also insanely effective in, spreading all sorts of, food and cultures and ideas and technology. And then finally, we have cultural exchange, which is a mutual sharing of information, usually cultural information such as religion and certain foods and dances and maybe specific types of clothing, and for the purpose of improving friendship and understanding between the two. So this would mainly occur between two nations, not, you know, a plethora of different nations. So the Silk Road, again, is an insanely powerful tool that was used by humans to exchange regionally, cross culturally, and culturally because it could be used for very short distances. It was very effective at trading. No matter how far you traveled to it, there was always somebody there, willing to trade or talk about something. And it helped improve relationships with neighboring countries themselves, or just, from, city to city, state to state type things. Then we have the Mayflower, which was when the Puritans from England traveled to Plymouth, the U.S., and then, they would exchange their ideas with the Native Americans there, and, so on and so forth. So the Native Americans would learn from the Americans, or not the Americans, from the British, and then the British would learn from the Native Americans, and it would be a constant trade of such and such. And then Christopher Columbus was virtually the same thing kind of going on with the Puritans. He would, travel over to the U.S., or not to the U.S., but to America, and then, collect information from the natives, except it was kind of more brutal because he murdered most of them. That's besides the point. And then we have British and their tea, when the Britain exchanged tea with the Asians and, also other stuff, such as, gunpowder was a very heavy thing, so, they learned to do that. And then a lot of medicine came from, Asian countries, significant, or mostly China. China was a significant, medical country. And then we have World War II diplomacy. During World War II, many countries wanted to spread diplomacy to nearby countries in an attempt to avoid another world war, which, they would spread diplomacy, but through that diplomacy of, like, let's all, stay calm type thing, relax, trust in each other, they would spread their culture within that to also kind of make some countries almost blend into another to, at one point, stop another world war.